y'all, this is Aemok.
Madam Hexe.
And kayce.
And this is Trouble Comes in Three. This podcast discusses scandalous topics like communication and sexual health, along with ethical non-monogamy, kink, leather, and more. If you're under 18, please visit scarletteen.com. But if you're over 18, join us and let's get naughty.
So we have a little bit different circumstances this evening, thanks to the pandemic. So we are trying this out via Skype. So let us know if there were any kind of sound quality issues. We're really curious to know how this works. Just getting that out of the way.
Yeah. So far, so good on our end, but
so far, so good. So we'll see what it looks like post-production. We'll be like, hi, fix it.
Shade Tree, you love us.
Yeah. But so for our topic, we're kind of like discovering or talking about different fetishes and kinks right now. And we're talking tonight something near and dear to all of our hearts. Tonight is objectification.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, yes. And Kaitlyn, actually, you teach a class on objectification, don't you?
Yes, I teach a class on objectification without degradation, humiliation. So I teach kind of a spin-off of objectification as a whole, focusing a lot on like Forniphilia, and which is being used as furniture.
Okay.
And so I teach that, and then that's kind of near and dear to my heart because personally I don't.
Take his collar up. Sorry, y'all. Pandemic problems. The puppy's collar is making too much noise. There we go. Back to objectification. And now he's climbing on her.
He's just getting in on the topic. So I teach on objectification in that sense because that's something that I kind of had to find a workaround for because I have an aversion to degradation and humiliation. And so, but I really had a love for objectification, and it's something that I always wanted to do, but a lot of people are like, oh, well, you can't have those things separately. So you either have to get over your limits on degradation, humiliation, or just not do objectification. And so I worked for a while talking to a few different people and trying to figure out how to, I don't know that manipulate's the right word, but kind of manipulate objectification, manipulate the
Look, kink is like yoga. You can modify it to suit your needs, okay?
Right.
And anyone who's like, oh, you can't have this if you don't have that, you just lack creativity, people.
Right.
Like,
Watch me. I do what I like.
But yeah, so that's kind of how that class came about, is because I wanted to offer that kind of less heard of viewpoint on the topic.
I think that's great for class discussions, like something that's like, it's always great to have like basic skill sets, but I always like it when presenters and educators have like their own personal spin on something, like on a topic, because it's like, oh, well, I've never heard it from this way before. So that's always good. But let's talk about, let's define objectification, because we may have some people listening that are like, I don't know what that means. You know, we have some advanced listeners, but we also have some new people. So who wants to take a stab at kind of describing objectification?
I'm getting the look, so I guess that's what you're looking at me.
It is your class, so.
Even through the camera. But yeah, so the way that I describe objectification is using or treating somebody like an object. Now, in the vanilla sense of this word, this is with or without consent. In the kink definition of the word, it's with the consent always.
Always.
Yes.
Consent is sexy, people.
Yep.
Consent
is mandatory.
Right.
But yeah, so basically that's kind of the overall general definition.
It is just that literal, being used or treated as an object.
Yep.
So what are some of the most popular kinds of objects that people get treated as? Because like Aemok is a switch, but she's service oriented. You know, Kaitlyn's the bottomiest bottom there ever did bottom, and I'm on the top side of things. So these are different experiences with objectification, but what are some of like the big ones we typically see out in the world?
So some of the ones that I see are really common, especially as kind of beginner into objectification, are things like being a footstool. It's actually, if you Google search slave positions, a footstool or a tabletop position is one of the positions that's on every chart. And so that's kind of like everyone's first glance at what could be objectification, I feel. And so there's that. One of my favorites is an ashtray. And then
mine too.
And then some of the like well-known ones are like being sexually objectified. So, whether in the sense of just being looked at or in the sense of actually kind of being the sex doll or sex toy. Those are some of the main ones that pop into my head. I don't know, as far as like some of the like right off the bat comes to mind that would probably be seen by a lot of people, whether they're in kink or not. Well, deep into kink or just starting
right.
out.
And like, so some of those I would say were like people that are overtly looking for objectification. Like that's the primary kink there. But there's a lot of crossover in the things that we do. You know, when a muck is, you know, servicing her guys at a party or an event or something, you know, there can be that crossover, right?
Yeah. So I've seen, like she said, footrest or footstool, things like that. Tables are very common. While they might be kind of beginner, like dip your toes in, they can involve some pretty intense things.
You can always turn it up.
Yes. Yeah. That's the best part about it is there's so many different levels to it.
So, you know, you might be in tabletop position, acting as a table, or on your knees acting as a table with your hands out. But if you put some sort of like rice on the ground that you're having to kneel in, or a drink in your hand that you're going to have to hold, something liquidy or hot that you're going to have to hold for an extended period of time.
Better not drop it.
Get those what do you call it? The isometric exercises where you go like
oh yeah. So those are really common. I also see within like leather side of things, people who might not necessarily be thinking it's objectification, but it can cross into those boundaries, are things like holding your master's drinks, being a drink holder.
One of my big things.
You know, being the toy bag. I will have to say that I have seen some really, really super hot scenes where a D type has more than one S type. And the S type that is not currently being played with is the toy rack.
I have done that before.
It is
very helpful too.
I like that idea.
They have to like stand there and they're the ones holding the toys or like keeping the toy area organized, like whatever it is.
I like it.
Like they're not getting any of the quote, the fun of playing, but they're getting all of the fun of being useful girl or useful boy.
All right, so I have done that with like the toys that have the loops at the end. So I like to loop them in under the knuckles and have them hold out. So the weight does pull on your hands. So it is pulling on your forearms. So part of it's like, oh, and now you get to watch me play with someone else. Sometimes I'll make them turn their back to me and their arms to the side. So they don't get to see it. They only get to hear it. And they're still having to have their little arms like turned out like chicken wings holding on to all this shit.
Oh, yeah. They wouldn't want to inconvenience you.
Right. No, don't. No.
One of my favorites, particularly for parties, is the cigarette girl. Like
with the tray,
old school with the tray, except for
to be one yet.
the pterodactyl cigarette girl. So they're tied up holding the tray, and they have to do everything with like little bitty like T-Rex arms or pterodactyl arms. Yeah.
I hope that cigar is long because.
Yeah, I did that to a friend, Phoenix Rose,
at
a party, and she had to serve my sir pita chips and dip. While attached to the tray, she's having to try to like do the thing. Oh my god, it was great.
Just toss it out of his mouth.
One of my favorite experiences was being a snack tray, and not in the like neo-tamori sense of it, which I believe originated in Japan, and it's basically the art of eating food off the body as you become the serving tray. But in there, I was basically locked into a stand. With my arms bound under holding a tray, full of snacks at a party, and I was just basically locked there in the corner, and people could come up and get their snacks.
Just a pretty statue. There you go.
And so that was really, really, really fun.
And then there's also objectification in the more sexual or visual aspect of it, of
right.
Dolling someone up.
I was hoping you were gonna bring that up. Do we consider like bimbo, himbo, and dollification? Do we consider that under the wider umbrella of objectification, or more like?
I consider definitely dollification as objectification because it's basically turning you into a doll, which is an object.
Right.
And bimbo and himbo could be considered objectification in the sense that you're objectifying them for their looks, but I think it would depend on who you ask and the reasons behind it. If the reasons behind it are because they want to just be the hot dumb girl, that might not so much be objectification as much as it is like a mix with degradation and humiliation also. And so I really think that's kind of in the eye of the beholder.
Isn't it always, though? That's the problem. It's hard to give people definitive answers because it's like, well, it depends. Who did you ask?
But yeah, no. And so, yeah, no, I think for me personally, I would say dollification, absolutely. Bimbofication, it's kind of that fine line of the crossover between a few kinks. I think that's why because I know we've talked in like previous podcasts that I am sort of kind of on the fence about being into like bimbofication, but might be more adept to dollification. I think that's why dollification appeals to me more, just because I can be like, oh, well, I'm just being an object. So it's already falling into one of my kinks.
That's fair. Now, Muck, you mentioned a little earlier about like how you can add intensity to some of these experiences. Let's talk about maybe like the intro version. Like, what are some good tips on like beginner objectification? What's kind of like the mindset to be in? Most kinks and fetishes kind of have goals to them. You know what I mean? Like, what am I trying to accomplish by doing this thing? Like, what is it that's appealing about it?
For me, things like being Sir's cup holder or table or footrest, those things, for me, it's a very comforting feeling. Particularly things like the footrest, where he's got his weight is on me.
Literally under his boot.
Yes. It's the same thing. Like, I love when I get to do boot blocking with somebody that I care about and they put their boot on, like, physically on me. That's my preference.
Like on the thigh or the shoulder.
Thigh, chest, face, whatever.
Thigh, chest, face, whatever.
All of the things. Whatever.
I adore you.
But it's a very comforting feeling that weight literally being under his boot. It's also the like core of my need to be useful. That is my number one thing for like my relationship with them is I want to be useful to them. I want to make their life easier. And so doing these things, if I'm holding his cup or I'm getting his cup and then I'm holding it for him, well, then he has both hands to talk or take notes or whatever he needs to do. So I'm making his life easier. Also, I'm keeping his drink safe if he wanders away.
Which we're apt to do as D-types. We tend to wander. You got to rein us in sometimes. Go ahead, kitten. What you got? You got two snoots. Tell us.
So you kind of hit on one of the things. So when I think of objectification for like the need and getting into the headspace, there are kind of three different headspaces you can go with it. And that is the need, like the headspace of I'm getting to be useful, I'm getting to be of service. The headspace of I'm becoming and being treated as less than human. This is degrading. And the headspace of, well, I'm being treated as less than human, and this is embarrassing to me, which means that it's humiliating.
Okay.
I think that's where it goes between objectification, humiliation, and degradation.
Yeah,
people use humiliation and degradation interchangeably, and I personally, they are not the same. They're very different.
Yeah.
Can I have the blanket?
Yes, absolutely. And so I think that those are kind of the three main headspaces people come at it from. So for me, it's that headspace of getting to be of use, getting to be of service, very similar to aemok. I love that, and for me, it's a comfort in the sense of my anxiety, especially in large crowds. So if I'm at a convention with my D-type and I'm getting to be basically their walking drink holder or their walking ashtray, then my brain ultimately switches into service mode, and that's all that matters in that point. It's almost kind of like a high protocol situation, because all that matters to me is being that object then and there, and so everything else can go away, and I'm focused on holding the drink, moving with them, so it's within, if they put their arm out like this, they're going to be able to grab their drink. And so like that's
all good service.
And so like for me, that's kind of one of the more like lower levels of objectification, is when I can move with them. So I'm holding their bag, holding their drink, holding their stuff, and moving with them, so it's always easily accessible, as opposed to being a table in the sense of I'm standing in the corner with the things in my hands and I'm not moving from that corner even if they move away.
Right. Different strategy.
Yeah.
I think from the top side of it, when I use like Forniphilia in particular in like my dynamic, like whether he's a foot rubber or he's a footstool, a lot of the times, like while I watch TV or something, I like to elevate my legs, or holding my things, or being an entertaining piece of equipment. I think a big part of it for why I like it is, for him, it's an exercise in humility, because he's a grown-ass man and now he's a tabletop and balancing wine on his shoulder blades, looking a little bit ridiculous, but also like amazing to me.
He looks amazing.
But I think the biggest part of it for me, from my side, is it's an exercise in devotion. Like, this adult human being is willing to be on the floor underneath literal boots that have been stomping around outside. You know, it's not something that would be like a quote normal experience. Like, the bottom of the shoes are gross. You don't want them on your face or whatever. But the fact that they belong to somebody that you care about takes that entire portion, that entire hesitation out of things. Now, there are some people that just like dirty things in their faces, but if you think about what a boot is for, these boots are made for walking. These boots are meant to push things down and to crush things down beneath your feet. So having somebody willingly put themselves in that position underneath your boots, I think, is a huge sign of devotion, and it just tickles me.
Yeah, that, and I think it's a really good exercise in power, in the power differential, especially, kind of for that reason, which is why I personally love it as a part of power exchange relationships. I'm willing to offer service in the sense of objectification in things like parties and to people I'm close to, right. But there is definitely that extra layer when it comes to someone that I'm in a dynamic with and being utilized in that way by them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I also use him like as a purse guard, like when I'm walking, walk the streets tonight or whatever, I mean, he's not a big dude, but he's a dude. And so automatically that gives you a little more street cred. So he's trained to wherever my purse moves on my body, whether it's left or right or fanny pack or whatever, he moves himself to be in line with that bag as a means of an alarm system.
He's a mobile security system.
Yeah, he's an attack dog. Or at least it's an early warning dog. I don't know.
Early warning puppy.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some other, let's go back to our, Mark mentioned it earlier, the humiliation and degradation are separate things. How best do you define them?
So degradation for me is when the act is about making the other person feel less than. It's literally putting a person down.
You're downgrading,
Yeah. Sometimes it's the dirty little pig or the dirty little slut or, just literally the doormat kind of situation. You're putting them down. It doesn't necessarily have a usefulness to it. It can. But the whole point is to make the person feel less than human or less than their station.
Right.
Humiliation is similar, but the point is to make the person feel embarrassed about being that thing. I know a fuck ton of super proud, happy, dirty slut, cum gutter pigs. Like, all the adjectives, myself included. But that's to me, that's not humiliating. There's
Right.
There's nothing humiliating about being like, oh, you're my fucking cum dumpster. Like, yes,
like,
please more.
You're like, yes.
Right. But the humiliation is when you're doing something similar, but the goal of it is to humiliate the other person, to make them feel ashamed or embarrassed because they're put down.
So with those definitions, it can change the kind of mode of objectification based on the scenario too. Because if you're using me as a footstool, ashtray in your private home, that's all fine and dandy, me, it's fine. But say you wanted to move that to a convention with 500 plus people, and I'm not into this isn't me at all, because I am very much so into exhibition.
In the example,
if I wasn't into exhibition, that could be extremely embarrassing and humiliating to me to be put to use in that way in front of other people's eyes. Right. And so I think situation plays a lot with it too.
I think another really good example of that, like, it could borderline, depending on the situation, is if you have a play partner who might be nervous about trying something new in front of people, and then they're the demo bottom for something, very intimate, like
CBG.
Yes.
We were thinking the same thing.
Just the demo toy.
Yes. So definitely. And I think in those circumstances of like humiliation, something like objectification can give you a task and can either help quell some of those feelings of embarrassment because you're hyper-focused, or it can at least give you a duration on when it might be over. Wow. When she finishes ashing her cigar on my tongue, the cigar is gone and then it's over. So it's almost kind of like unless, of course, she lights up again. But, hope springs eternal.
And we're just over here being like, oh, please light another one.
Please light another one. Now, the class that you teach, Kaitlyn, is specifically objectification without degradation. Is it without humiliation and degradation, or primarily not degradation?
Without both, with the understanding
without intentional humiliation, I should say.
With the understanding that what falls into that category for me as not being degrading or humiliating might be someone's like perfect definition of what humiliation and degradation is, because it's all going to be subjective to the human experience in it. And I can only teach on my experiences and what's comfortable within my own profiles.
Right.
And so that's how I present it, is it's education basically through the sense of purely for service, or for the enjoyment of being an inanimate object and not having to think, because that's fucking great.
Yeah.
And so like in the class we kind of go over basically what we've kind of done already, like the definitions of what are the three of them, to differentiate how they're all separate, because they do oftentimes get intertwined. Like when I teach this class, like at the very beginning, for show raise of hands, like when you think of objectification, does degradation, humiliation come to mind? Pretty much everyone's hands go up. And then keep your hand up if you think they can be separate, and then only a few hands go down. And so that's kind of like the starting point for my class.
I mean, I have been going to conferences and taking classes and studying and reading for a disgustingly long time, particularly in compared to our little baby, Kaitlyn.
She's like, I'm doing my best.
I read a lot. It's fine.
But yours was the first class that I had ever gone to that looked at it as a separate.
Like
I mean, I had even co-taught classes on objectification, but I had never seen one. It was always, objectification, humiliation, degradation, like some combination of those three words all together. And when I knew that
they are separate things.
They're separate things. And I knew that objectification does not have to be sexual. I had never seen anyone actually present it as its own topic in a way that wasn't just like a sentence at the end of the class. Like,
yeah. If you guys are interested in learning more about humiliation in particular, that does have a lot of objectification in it because it's just kind of the nature of the beast. Sometimes they go together because if you're being used as a lamp, you might feel a little silly with a lampshade on your head. But there's a book, I don't know if you girls have read it. It's called Enough to Make You Blush by Princess Kali. It's The Art of Erotic Humiliation is the title of the book, but it's Enough to Make You Blush is kind of like the subtitle of it. It's not a long read. But it's really great for people that are trying to get into objectification and kind of almost get over the hurdle of the embarrassment factor. And obviously she offers playful kind of additions to make it more embarrassing if that's your thing, but
Yeah.
I recommend it.
So one of my favorite parts that I think a lot of people forget, and shout out to my friend Autumn.
Mm-hmm.
They live up in Tennessee, I believe. Sorry if you live in a different state, but I think Autumn lives in Tennessee. But they taught a really, really good class on humiliation, degradation, objectification. And when we were talking about it beforehand, they got into the points of part of the fun for a lot of us. It's not just about making you an object. It's not just about, putting you down, making you feel less than. It's about crumpling you into the ground and then building you back up in a better version.
Yeah.
And that's why I really love that.
Yeah.
Like,
you do come out a bit changed on the other side.
Yeah. And so, it's not just about, it can be, the point is I'm going to make you feel terrible and less than, but let's pull you back out of that. Oh, you're just a fucking footstool, but you were the most useful footstool in the world.
Right?
You're the perfect height for my feet.
Yeah, sometimes it's about facing your fears too and your insecurities in a way. If you're somebody that's, when it comes to the humiliation, when it's coupled with objectification, if there's something about yourself that makes you uncomfortable, like let's say you're one of those normal humans that when you bend forward, you have rolls on the side of your tummy. Everybody has them. I don't care who you are. Everybody has them. But if that's something you're super self-conscious of, and I have you in a curled up footstool position, naked, and your rolls are out, you are being an object and being of use, but you're also kind of faced with the fact that, oh my God, my rolls are out. And you kind of work through those feelings. Kaitlyn's like, oh, no, thank you.
Face is like,
or is that a please, ma'am? May I have another? I'm going to take that silence as a resounding yes. You guys can't see her face, but I can.
Oh, it's recorded. I might use that as the snippet.
The snippet.
The little picture. It's good when her eyes disappear.
Like, up and over.
Yes. When her
eyes, the eyebrows just gone.
Gone.
She's like, if I can't see you, you can't see me.
Pretty much how that works.
Yeah. Sorry.
Very sound logic. If I can't see you, you obviously can't see me.
Yep, see? So what are some of our favorite experiences, either being objectified or objectifying others? A little bit of, let's run through our favorites. Let's do this shit.
Why are you both looking at me?
Do you have a favorite experience?
I have a lot.
It doesn't have to be like, oh, my number one experience. Just the top ones that come to your mind. Like we're constantly reorganizing our experiences in our minds.
I talked a little bit about being the serving tray at a party. So that was really fun for me. It was I would say that it's not my favorite, but it's one of my most interesting ones because it was completely detached from a dynamic at all. And so I wasn't involved with anybody at that party. I wasn't involved with the hosts of the party. It was simply, would you like to do this thing at our Halloween party? Sure, I don't see why not. And at the time, I didn't have a dynamic. And so for me, I see it as kind of, it was my first real sense of objectification in person.
In the practical sense.
So I had a dynamic before that had talked about, it was actually where I started to get the idea for my class, because I had a dynamic where we were partially mismatched on kinks, where I loved the idea of objectification he loved degradation, humiliation, and through a lot of conversation, we kind of came to understand that we both could get something we wanted from the exchange.
Nice.
Without it necessarily being about the other's kink, if that makes sense. So that's something I talk about a little bit in my class as well, because that was kind of the turning point for me of, so my top may be enjoying this because from in their brain, they're putting me down.
Right.
And it could possibly be embarrassing me, but it's not pressing into a hard limit of mine in the sense that I really want to be that object. And so something I ever got to like actually do with that partner, but I came to a lot of understandings and learned a lot about myself in that regard before moving forward, and allowed me to kind of get the ball rolling and thinking. And so when the opportunity came up, it was a couple that I had become close friends with from going out to the club events like that. And so
Scotch is making me
he wanted, so like they had wanted to do this thing, but he couldn't see his slave being the actual serving table when he wanted her also to be the host of the party.
Yeah.
It would be literally locked into a device, unable to move,
Right.
which makes it a little bit hard. And so they knew that it was something that I was into, and so they presented me the opportunity, and I took it. And so for me, it was interesting. It was kind of a really big step because it was the first time me being of use to other people, and it started with me being of use to an entire party.
Right.
So it was
go big or go home, right?
And like for some of the safety options, like because I was completely bound and locked in place, there were safety things in place. Like there was another friend of theirs who basically stood next to me the entire night to make sure, because it's a kink-friendly party, of course. I wasn't familiar with all of the guests. While the hosts knew all of them, they put that kind of quote-unquote
additional safety. Yeah.
So if for some reason someone did something I didn't like or tried to get too handsy, things like that, I had that backup, as opposed to me just being there helpless, just like, well, I can't really push you away because my hands are bound under. If I do, I'll drop this tray.
That's a responsible host. I appreciate that.
Responsible. So that was a really interesting experience for me. I really enjoyed it.
Those are some good things. Just real quick before you dive into the next story, those are some good things I think we should mention. Is like safety precautions. Yeah. How long am I going to be in this position? Do I have any kind of limitations mentally, physically, emotionally that's going to impact this experience? Who's going to have access to me? Especially in that situation where you're literally strapped into a device where you can't go anywhere. Who has access to me? Those are important questions in the negotiation phase, I think. Especially if you're doing this as more of kind of like pick up play or just playtime, as opposed to like when you're an established dynamic and you have that kind of shit handled. Still good to ask, like, should I pee first? Yes. Or am I going to be here, like, am I going to be here 4 hours? Am I going to have water breaks? That kind of thing,
right.
Yeah.
And so like some of the safety things that I talk about in my class are things like position. So you might be in a table, but you might not be able to be on your knees. You could be a standing table at that point. And so
modifications,
and so it's taking into account the body limitations and adjusting them to a way that suits your dynamic. And so it might not be in the quote unquote tabletop position.
Right.
But if you're holding things in your arms or on a tray in your hands, you're still being a table.
Yeah, I got a friend in a wheelchair that loves to be a table, and it just happens that they attach the tray to her knees.
Right.
And that way she can get around and offer the tray, that way she's still having that experience. It looks a little different, but she's still getting to get that tickled, basically.
Right. And then other things are like who's going to be around, negotiating who's allowed to touch you, who isn't. That comes into play when you're doing things where you're physically restrained.
Parties and groups as well.
When you're at parties, like if the food's on your body, of course people are going to be touchy, but it's okay. But is the food going to be laid in a place where they're not touching my genitalia? Or do
they have to use a utensil? Are they going to take it off my body with their mouth or their hand? Right. These are all good questions to ask.
And then also the safety as far as mentally, because there are going to be some experiences that you might try and find out they're not for you. So it's whether you finish it out.
Story.
So like whether you finish out the scene as the object or whether you need to call the scene putting stuff in place to do that, especially if you're in a position where the person that is doing the quote unquote scene with you isn't always going to be right by you. So let's say you're in a scene at a party, if they're walking around and moving around, things like that.
Yeah. Aemok had something. I see.
So this is one of those, Aemok does things she knows aren't going to be a great idea out of the need to be useful.
That, okay, yep, I accept that pattern. Let's go.
Yep. So years ago, I was at an event, and a friend of mine was doing a class on, like goddess worship and play and food play, like dessert tables.
Okay.
And
oh no,
you know how I feel about food. Keep going.
I don't do food play. It's one of the few things that really makes me squeak. Like, other people go for it. I'm all down. It is not on my personal preference list. Not even to like watch most of the time. So
especially not squishy food.
Oh God, not squishy food. So it's the morning of the class. We are outdoors at it's a space called Allward Acres. It's a sacred space. We were all camping out there. We go to do the event, and two of her bottoms like duck out and decide not to do it.
Like in the 11th hour, duck out?
Yeah, like an hour before the class was supposed to go. Both of the bottoms like
if you make a commitment, try to keep your commitment, not just in this world, but like in any community. If you say you're going to be, try your best. Try your best.
So she's panicky because she's like, what am I going to do? I'm teaching this whole class on like food play and worship and things. And what am I going to do? And I was like,
worship myself.
I was like, so what is this going to involve? She talked to me and I'm like, all right, I'll do it. But the trick is that no, I don't want anything in or around my genitalia. Specifically my southern hemisphere genitalia. Like nipples were fine, lower extremity, please avoid. And
beware the Bermuda Triangle.
The shower had to be on and ready to go as soon, and the showers were like 30 feet from where the class was going to be held. And I was like, it needs to be on and ready for me. Like,
I will not be here for Q&A. I will bolt the hell out.
Yeah. And so here I am, the girl who like gags at food play is on a table and becomes a giant sundae.
Oh no!
Oh no! Picky things.
Didn't we know someone who did nachos once? And I'm like, I should not yuck people's yum, but it just.
I will also point out, I believe this was a May or April event in
so it's
Florida,
hot.
So it is hot.
It's already hot.
Ew, like warm dairy.
Oh my God, yes, there was all kinds, and I don't know why, but she chose butterscotch pudding, which I love butterscotch, but that is not a good color to like pour on someone's body.
It's gonna look like baby sick.
Oh yeah, it was a lot. And there was this whole, like, I hated every minute of it because, like, I hate food play, and it's so gross, and it was, like, melting in, like, all of my cracks and crevices, like.
Oh, no. Oh, my God.
Y'all know I hate my armpits touched, too, so, like.
Yeah. Oh, no, did you have any? Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. But then at the same time, like, there was this overwhelming sense of, like, I say through this in front of all of these people doing this disgusting thing and made my friend, like, I made her life better. I was useful. I was nothing but a very gross Sunday, and now I can run away. Right. And so it was this whole, like, mix of objectification, because even though she was teaching a class about, like, worshiping your partner and making them into the Sunday, like.
You're like, I didn't feel worshipped, but it's okay.
Not feeling.
I felt punished.
It was a whole lot of like degradation for me.
Yeah.
I don't think I will say I'd ever do it again.
Well, you definitely don't have to do it again.
It was a situation where, you know, somebody really needed like
emergency,
then I probably would, because that's how I roll. But it was a very confusing situation, because I should not have enjoyed any of that, and then I came out like a little bit wet in a good way, because it was like.
Because you were so useful and so helpful, and you know, even though there was that degradation piece, there was also that teeny bit of exhibitionism that was like, oh, look at all these people watch me, and they're loving it. They're probably loving it. So you're also providing this joy,
They absolutely loved the fact that I was so uncomfortably squirmy. That added to it for them, for sure.
Yeah. Much to that tune, I definitely agree that for me, getting to hold on to that, I get to be useful and be of service thing definitely gets me past a lot of the less nice feeling things.
Mm-hmm.
Like something can have a degree of degradation or humiliation to it, but if it's kind of like that give and take. If the outcome of it is ultimately going to hold more usefulness or service, then I can push past the uncomfortable bits. And so it's kind of like taking into account like, what are the benefits of this to the other person?
No, that's kind of how it is. That's predicament bondage of the mind.
Yes. I am all about that mind fucking, like, oh.
And I do have to say, like, we here on Table Comes 3 have strong opinions about food play, but we are not trying to yuck your yum. If that is your jam, I hope you're empowered to do it. I just don't want cake rubbed on my body, but, you do your thing. And I think we have some people that we probably know that are really into food play. And as a challenge for ourselves, I think we'll probably even do a fetish episode on food play.
Yeah.
And try to keep our reactions under control.
With their help, yes.
With their help, they will shepherd us through the buffet that is this literal kink. But I just wanted to point that out. My favorite experiences typically have to do with cigars, though, because that is one of my things: is smoking cigars, being around them, being around the smoke, and using people as ashtrays. What you got in your mind, Kaitlyn?
Oh, no, keep going.
Oh, no, keep going. I'll go off for days. Tell me
about being your ashtray.
Is it about being the ashtray?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, we'll get to that. We actually did. We taught a class in a private home on cigar play in particular. It was a little bit about cigars, but it was primarily about smoke and ash play. And it was in a private home, so we could get a little more risque about it. Now, coming through my journey, I have bottomed for being an ashtray. It was one of those things where I preferred to actually hold a literal ashtray in my hand, which was acceptable where I was. I didn't have to actually receive it in my palm if I didn't want to. But, and as far as consuming ash, it's one of those things. And we did a cigar episode that it's just kind of, once you try it, it's not so bad. But Kaitlyn and I, she was the demo bottom for this cigar class. And she did very well. And I think our grand finale, was the best part, because I actually ashed the cigar on my own tongue and then fed her the ash, which was fantastic for her because it's ash and she's fond of me and she's being objectified. But she has a thing about tongues. Doesn't like wet, sticky tongues, doesn't like any of that business. So it was also a challenge a little bit to like possibly receive essentially an ashy loogie in her mouth. And I think she did very well, all things considered.
Yeah, I was told that it would either be basically spit into my mouth or rolled off her tongue into my mouth, but I didn't know which one until it happened.
It was a game day decision, because if it had come off and it started rolling, I would have had to spit it to get it into your mouth. Otherwise, it would have landed like ungracefully all over your face, which is cute, but not the goal. It just worked out that it came off in a perfect like little inch of ash, and I was able just to like pass it to your tongue from my tongue. But being an ashtray is something that my boy does for me all the time. He's not big on eating ash. He will consume my ash if he's got nowhere to put it, because he kind of feels bad about just like dropping it. Feels a little disrespectful to him. But it's definitely something where, like you guys pointed out earlier, it's a need to be useful. And this desire that, yes, I'm being objectified as an ashtray, and which is usually a dirty, discarded little dish and things like that. And you are taking on that role. But to him, I don't think it's definitely doesn't touch any kind of humiliation or degradation. He's quite happy to receive. So that just tells you that it's a personal preference. What you got, Kaitlyn?
Yeah, no. So that kind of leads to my kind of favorite experiences in the realms of objectification. One of the areas where I get the most, or at least thus far in my journey, I've gotten the most use from is being an ashtray. In the sense of holding an ashtray or holding ash in my hands, but also in the sense of eating ash and having cigars and cigarettes put out on my body, which also kind of plays into a masochism.
Right, because you do run the risk of some burns.
So for me personally, I don't mind scarification. I actually really like it.
Right.
And so it's completely in my risk profile to possibly have scars from having these things put out on me. There are a lot of risks that come with that type of engagement, as well as risks that come with eating ash. Very, very much so kind of in line with smoking tobacco products and cigarettes and things like that, because I am a little bit of a different flavor of ashtray in that I'm not cigar only. So my previous sir smoked cigarettes, and so my intro into ash play was cigarettes and cigarette ash, which are very, very different from cigars and cigar ash. There's a lot of different additives and chemicals. I know, I see both of your faces.
I'm not a cigarette smoker though. I only smoke cigars, so I'm always like,
Yeah, and so it was.
I smoke none of the above.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know that I would go back to cigarette play. I think that was something that formed specifically for that dynamic and might just stay with that dynamic. But cigarettes held like a weird family tie in my mind, like the smell of menthol. I know, I see your eyebrows wiggling. The smell of menthol cigarettes.
It's not that weird. It's not that weird.
It's all my grandparents smoked, so I grew up with smell. So the smell was very comforting for me.
Nostalgic.
Kind of, yeah. And so it just kind of escalated from there.
I get that a lot. A lot of people will tell me like, "Oh, my grandfather smoked cigars. I like being around you because you smell like a cigar," you know.
To this day, vanilla pipe tobacco will make me just like start bawling immediately because I used to pack my papa's pipe for him, and that was the tobacco that he smoked.
Right.
And
yeah.
For me, it holds that like very much so tie to him, and just makes me think of him. But yeah, and so I'm kind of the odd person out because you'll see a lot of ashtrays in regards to cigars and cigar smoke,
right?
And cigar ash, but I was an equal opportunity ash eater.
I think that's because cigars have kind of a special place in leather history and that community, and I think the cigarette smoking, although of course like loads of people in the leather community smoke cigarettes as well, but because like things like cigar socials and like rooftop parties, and it's a big kind of like the D-type smoke the cigar. I think that's why you see more people that when they say ashtray, they mean cigars.
Yeah.
But I think as far as like, I know there's some people that follow me on FetLife and a couple other platforms that are equal opportunity smoke fanatics. One of them is also into like cigarette burns and things like that. But I think the leather community is where that kind of like differentiation between like the cigar ashtray and then the all-purpose like smoke tray.
Yeah. Yeah.
So. I think it's probably because of the ritual of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not.
We love a good ritual, don't we, Mark? I love the whole process.
But I lost it. Oh, one of my goals is, so I can't remember the name of the actual thing, but it's basically a very, very fancy and decorative stand for an ashtray.
Okay.
And my papa had one all growing up, and it's so pretty.
Our resident librarian is going to check on that for you. I can see her already tick-tacking away. I mean, she's on. If you ever need to know anything, and she's within 100 yards of you, her little ears perk up, and the corgi puts on her glasses and goes tick, 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 tick.
Yeah.
I love it. Such a good girl. Anyway.
For me, it's always kind of been one of my fantasies to have a custom one made where, I am basically the stand that the ashtray rests on over my head type thing, or that my face and mouth just get to be the actual ashtray in the stand.
That's interesting. I'm interested to see what it looks like, what the actual item looks like. Is it like an antique style thing?
Kind of antique style. And so basically it has a solid base, generally like a very decorative base, and then a metal pole that goes up. And then there is generally a large, wide, shallow disc type ashtray. And then there's kind of a handle over the top of it generally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
She's pulled up a photo of this iron. Oh, it is beautiful.
Yeah, and so there's some really, really decorative ones. My pop-up.
At first glance, it kind of looks like a standing lamp, like an oil lamp. Like when you first glance at it.
But for me, like my papa had one that had like a jade ashtray in it. So there are some plain ones, there are some really, really fancy ones. And so I was like, ooh, do like a birdcage style base to it instead of the singular pole that I fit inside.
Oh, I see where you're going with that. Ultimate objectification.
I've just been like, and like those can be used for cigar ash too. So,
oh, yeah, I don't see why not.
But generally speaking, those were used a lot with cigarettes in particular. But yeah, so it's just like all the things.
Oh, that is pretty. Oh, I like that one. She's
like an art.
Aemok has found a bunch of examples of these like antique style ashtrays. They're not really ashtrays. They're like stands. They're like beautiful.
Trays
or standing ashtrays.
Standing ashtrays.
Right. So
yeah.
That's your fantasy object to be is one of these beautiful. So could we just put you in like crystal jewelry and like a bronze like bodice, and then you just be the standing tray? Like if we dress you up the way that this item looks and call you it for now until we can afford some custom fancy birdcage. If you're a metalsmith and you're listening, we would be interested in commissioning you to build this item.
Yes. Yes to both of those things. Yes, we're interested in having someone build the item. Also, I would be interested in testing the waters with it of basically just being dressed as the thing. But
we could bind her down.
So I have no doubt.
I
have no doubt.
Oh, between the two of you, yeah, no problem. But yeah, so
we'll put a pin in that for later.
But yes, like I would say that being an ashtray is probably my biggest and like favorite thing about objectification. But I also like the more personal services, like being the footstool, because for me it's almost a meditative state that I get to go into, because there isn't an inherent involvement. Like when I'm doing something at a party, there's the hustle and bustle of everything, but when I'm doing something one-on-one like that, especially in regards to, let's say you were watching a movie or you're doing some work on your laptop or you're reading a book, it's getting to be in service to you and have that tie to you while we're both kind of existing separately.
It's like a kinky cuddle.
It's a kinky cuddle, basically. And there's that, go ahead.
Oh, one of my favorites that I think is like an unintentionally but totally consensually intentional is your boy being your audiobook in the bathtub.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's true.
Fucking love that. It's so goddamn cute. And I'm like,
that's one of our evening rituals. To give some context to that comment is I often take a bubble bath in the evening after work, and I'll have like a glass of scotch or a glass of wine. I'm a voracious reader, and I want to soak my hands. I don't want to get the book wet or whatever. So my slave will actually sit beside my bathtub and read my book to me while I'm in the tub, and it's a very intimate experience. But also, again, I guess it is technically objectification because he might as well be a gramophone or something like that.
Yeah, it is very nice.
Good example. Good call.
Yeah. There's a couple that I've spoken of once before out in Hawaii. During our taboo episode when we were talking about 1950s, but she does objectification because it's a reverse 1950s, so female led. Then her male sub is basically the quote unquote housewife, if you're thinking of 1950s. But she'll put him in a corner with like a cone around his head and make him sing to her.
Does he sing well? I imagine.
I think he sings well. I believe he used to be like
a choral boy or something like that. Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, because I was like, it'd be funny until it's like, all right, shut up, you yowling cat.
But yeah, no, and so like things like that are definitely fall into it, and they are very, very intimate in the best way possible.
That's fantastic. I don't know if we have time or not. Did we want to touch briefly on sexual objectification as one of the flavors?
I think it's important to include.
I think it is, because we've talked mainly about like the non-sexual aspect, and I think one of the things that people think of maybe initially that haven't been exposed to all of this is when I say, you've objectified her or him or them, it's like you've sexually objectified, and that's kind of like at least from the vanilla world, I think that's the automatic assumption. So let's touch on that a little bit on sexual objectification specifically. You had a snoot, Kaitlyn, and then you took it away when I said sex. You're like, nope, I'm out.
No, I was going to say that that's actually, so the way that I started presenting my objectification class was I competed in a competition that aemok actually hosted. And one of the main questions from the judges that they really hit hard on was, how are you going to be able to sell this class to people, say, that come in and basically talk about objectification, the negative senses, the non-consensual sense that we view it in society, which is bisexual objectification. And it's really the context of it. We're taking it, almost think about it like you're thinking about consensual non-consent, in that you're taking what's typically a non-consensual experience, like being catcalled as you're running, things like that. But you're doing it in a consensual setting. You're purposefully doing it to be sexually objectified by either a partner, other people, it's whatever you and your partner negotiate. And so it's basically you're being created, you're either being dressed up or dressed down.
Very down.
Very, very down. To create this fantasy of what either your partner wants or what your partner thinks other people want of you. And so it can be getting done up and being paraded either on a date night out or at an event, things like that, where I can kind of toe the lines of the public doesn't have to know that that's what's being done.
Right.
But it's something that you and your partner can hold on to. And for me, it's kind of a fine line because I've always been sexually objectified in the non-consensual way.
Right.
At a very young age, because yay for me, I got tits at 11.
Yep, join the club.
But
I think as a person with breasts, this is something that we all just endure.
Right. And so unfortunately, and so it's kind of that weird line of, it's something that's been negative my whole life. It appeals to me in the sense of kind of taking back my sexuality.
Reclaiming that.
Yeah, like
rebranding the trauma.
Yeah, especially because, like, for me, one of the quotes I get, or not one of the quotes, one of the things I get a lot as an asexual is, well, then why do you dress so sexually?
Because the dress is not a yes, bitch.
Right, and so one of my favorite quotes is the Jessica Rabbit quote of, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way.
Right. And also, like, what does that have to do? Like, I think wearing sexy clothes and being sexual are not the same thing. But I can, But
for sexual objectification, that's kind of where it kind of flirts a fun line for me. Because it's people are going to look at me that way, but it's because my D-type wants them to.
Right.
I also like it. Actually, Madam Hexe and I went out, and I believe we went to the bar, and I was talking to her slave and one of the other people, and she was talking to a close friend at the bar, and I think that they had like made a comment about my outfit or how I was looking really nice that night, and then she made a comment to aemok and I in text the next day. She's like, yeah, that's my little artwork baby. Look at her, touch her and fuck you up. And I was just like, that's the most wholesome, sexually objectifying thing I've ever been told, and I love it. Because, like, yeah, that's right, I'm her artwork.
I think that's one of my favorite ways, especially when I have, when I'm with women is, and that's women in the inclusive sense. I think women are beautiful. And so I think it's fantastic when my best accessory is another beautiful woman. I like partially the dichotomy it presents. So I present typically as a kind of force to be reckoned with, kind of powerful, maybe a little cranky looking, but woman in the antithesis of what society says women should be. Women should be soft. Women should be maternally. Women should be these things. So kind of presenting in the opposite end of that spectrum, but having with me a woman that kind of fits more that traditionally beautiful, traditionally demure, traditionally like racy and risque as kind of a decorative item, and kind of displaying those juxtaposition of womanhood right next to each other. So for me, I'm just enjoying that in its own kind of like way. But that's one of my favorite ways to use objectification when I have a female partner, because it allows them a safe space to enjoy or be embarrassed into, because I have done it to a butch before, embarrass their way into having that experience. And that's fun for me. I'm not someone, like my boy, if I sexually objectify him, like I have use of all of his body parts, or I have the privilege to not use any of his body parts however I see. So for him, it's more of a visceral kind of like manhandling objectification. But with women, I tend to do more of kind of like the display of objectification. Like, look at this beautiful piece of artwork. Look at this fantastic creature that you don't get to sit next to. That kind of thing.
So we just melted the port.
We have kitten soup now. Is she on a towel, Aemok?
Yes. So,
okay. For your couch's sake, I hope so.
We have a steam cleaner. It's fine.
Yeah, I have
a steam cleaner. It's fine.
Please, in this household.
Yeah.
True. So in my current dynamic, obviously there's not sexual objectification between me and my guys.
Right.
In the sense of like, not between us.
Right.
I probably do sexually objectify them in my head every once in a while. But
right. Well, because they're fantastic, so it's one of those knee-jerk reactions.
Right. But for the most part,
do you like getting to sit on your sir's knee? I enjoyed that immensely.
I'm sorry, but sitting on her sir's lap with him groping my tits was probably that definitely
the greatest privilege of your life, like.
But it was one of those things where it was they're sadist enough and there are enough sadists around that I'm like, well, I'm being useful because they're all getting enjoyment, but I don't know what's happening. It was
I don't know how to feel.
That was actually what the sadists wanted, was like the look of terror and like, oh God, what do I do now? On your face. Like, that's what it was all about.
Yes, because I am sitting in a very handsome, very intimidating gay man's lap as he gropes my tits. Consensually.
It's mixed feelings.
Shortly after that, we put her slave in his lap too. So
that was also very funny.
I'm free.
But I'm sorry, darling, I cut you off. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
So we don't have that kind of objectification, and I don't really get a lot of opportunities to be even non-sexually objectified. Because generally we're running around at events working, and there's no time for that kind of stuff. It's the downfall. But in some of my sexual relationships, I really enjoy it. Particularly the like really degrading kind of objectification. Like, I'm literally just the sex toy.
Right.
You're going to use me however you want to use the sex toy, and I'm going to do a damn good job at that. Like, that stuff I absolutely love.
Yeah.
I can't do it with everybody, though.
No, it's very dependent.
Yeah. If it gets into, like, the humiliation play, like, I also love humiliation-based objectification, but it's few and far between that I have someone that I can play in those realms freely with, because they tend to hit into like the darker corners of my brain, and
sometimes it gets a little too real.
Yeah, you have to be prepared for that. Even in a non-degradation or humiliation, just the objectification can stir up feelings or thoughts or things like that, and so it has a risk to it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I have definitely had to, or had scenes stopped, because like shit just got too weird in my brain or in their brain, and we had to slow down. And then I also have a interesting like relationship with sexual objectification, because I'm a sex worker. I do cam work.
Yeah.
I'm literally
objectified every day. It's for money.
Every time. That's what it's there for.
All over the internet.
Yeah. People are paying for me to be a sex object for them.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's great, and I absolutely love it, and like it's a huge like power trip in my brain.
And then sometimes I see people in public and I'm like, ooh.
Yup. And so that's another part, is that this is a kink I really do enjoy in my sexual relationships, in my regular non-sexual relationships, but also like there are days it's my job. Like,
yeah, sometimes it's work.
Yep.
Get a lot of the objectification, like as a dominatrix, that's like people want that shit. And especially if you're going to scream at them in German, like, oh man.
It's you just kind of like become a kink dispenser.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing, like, I don't mind being a vending machine. Like, if you put in cash, you're going to get what you paid for. But I'm not here just to, like, distribute for your fetishes and kinks and stuff like that. So please respect your sex workers. Okay, we're not here to just distribute. This is a job. We get paid to do this. This is not favors. This is not, you are one of 300 people in this DM. Okay, no, you're not getting a special price. Okay, you can pay double because you asked. That's my opinion.
Same, girl.
That's my opinion. Okay, I don't go to your work and ask for a discount. Okay. Yeah, what you got on your schnoot, Kaitlyn? As final thoughts, or you got another story?
Sort of final thoughts, sort of another story. Controversial statement.
I'm ready.
You brought up being sexually objectified during sex. That's actually how I got through sex. As someone who doesn't like sex, I'm
not laughing at you. Just the way you're like, that's how I got through sex.
With specifically sex with men. Like for me, because I identified as asexual. Now I'm more gray sexual and just realized I'm a lesbian. But
so you realized that some of that aversion was because it was men.
Right. And so it's like, oh, well, that's the thing. But it was sex as a service and sex as an object. If I'm just being the fuck toy, I can definitely.
There you go. There's your roundabout.
So it's one of those things where, like, I tell people that and they get kind of like a look on my face. They're like, that doesn't sound okay. Do you need help? Like,
no, it's fine for me. I've consented. Like, it's,
that's how I got my mutual enjoyment out of the thing. And then I still got to be useful. It still had that power exchange kind of flow to it because they have the power to do what they want.
See, there was your out. I see that.
Yeah, so that's kind of how my brain functioned with that. But you saying that just brought it up to me. I was like, oh, yeah, that's the thing.
I think it's the way that you say it. Because you're like, oh, it got me through sex. As opposed to, like, this is how I
enjoy sex.
Sex that I normally would not have
enjoy
to do.
Right.
For me, sex is a service. That's
right. It's just this activity that, for me, it's just an activity that we do. It's this.
But for podcast's sake, they get the long-winded version.
Or they get the full explanation. No, but I do agree with Mark. Maybe we'll just fine-tune that delivery just a little bit for the public. But I think in this case, it's perfectly acceptable. Any final thoughts on objectification? Any tips, tricks, or references, that you can think of? Again, start small, I think, is always our big advice. Any kind of new fetish, start small.
Yeah. Do small increments at a time. Try it for 5 or 10 minutes. You can slowly up the ante. Don't go for, like, let's watch this 3-hour movie while you're in my footstool, but you're not allowed to talk. Like, don't start off at that point.
You will cramp. Don't do that to yourself.
You will cramp. You'll get exhausted. You might start freaking out in your brain and then feel like you can't say anything because they told you not to talk. Like, start slow. Keep communication open. If you don't want the verbal, create some form of nonverbal safe word. So, like, certain hand gestures, tapping your leg a certain amount of times, things like that they can do it. But
a puppy clicker.
Yeah,
puppy clicker.
Because then you don't even have to move.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of my biggest recommendation, really.
Have fun with it.
Yeah. Don't take yourself too seriously. You're going to break down laughing, probably.
Right, especially if you're doing it, like, if someone else is like, I'd really love to use you as a furniture, and you're like, I'm open to trying that because you want to, but I will feel ridiculous. Do it anyway. You're still probably gonna have fun. Why are you into the objectification? Have a goal, like
someone.
Yeah, like, why do you want to objectify someone? I think that's really great for people that are trying out new fetishes and kinks, like trying to identify why you're into it or why you want to try it is helpful so that you can kind of angle the experience in a way that's going to best emphasize that. So if you're into objectification for, I want to feel useful or I want to feel inanimate and like put to the side like a lamp or a wine holder or something like that, that's important to know, because if you're put in a situation where you're doing more of an active service role as an item, it's not going to tickle you in the same way. Or if you're really like, I want to be objectified because I also think it'll be kind of embarrassing and that kind of does it for me, or I'm working through some stuff. Knowing why you want to try it is going to help you enjoy it better, I think, and do it safely, personally. That's how I think.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, we can't clink for 5. I have my 2 cups here, so we can clink each other. So remember, trouble
Comes in threes.
Well, hold on. Again. And remember, trouble comes in 3 and get fucked. Speaking of embarrassing, like, thanks to myself.